With the release of Factorio Space Age came 4 new planets, each with its own distinctive visual style and gameplay mechanics. But if you know anything about the Factorio community, you know that there's one question everyone had on their mind. Why not add more planets? And I'm happy to say that just a few months after Space Age's release, the mod portal is already full of additional player-made planets, many of which are very interesting and of extremely high quality. In this video, I'll be playing through just a few of these planets, with the goal of putting some eyes on these mods and hopefully helping you find something new to add to your next Factorio game. Needless to say, if you'd rather go into any of these planets blind, you should skip this video for the moment because it'll contain spoilers. First up on our list, we'll be going... Wait, not here. That's better. Welcome to the moon of Fulgora, Cerys. The first thing you'll probably notice about this place is... it's tiny. And you have this gorgeous view of Fulgora in the background. A unique thing about this planet is that due to solar winds, you can't send down any cargo pods containing items until after you've completed the separate Cerys-specific tech tree. Although mercifully, the mod maker lets you bring construction bots to make the building less painful. The main resource on Cerys is nuclear scrap, which is a lot like the regular scrap you're familiar with, but with even more insane output. Since you can't bring anything from space, you get your initial building resources by deconstructing some old ruins. Oh yeah, and you might have noticed that this entire place is frozen, much like Aquilo. That's where these things come in. Radiative heating towers. They take solid fuel and keep an area around themselves at a nice cozy temperature. But before we get to building a base, we'll need to use solar panels we got from these ruins, and these new buildings called charging rods. They play a very interesting role on this planet, but they also serve as accumulators, so that's how we'll be using them for now. To get some initial resources, I'll need to mine straight into recyclers, then pull out any steam turbines and centrifuges, recycle them again for gears, and recycle the gears for iron plates. Also mass recycle red circuits to get some greens. While waiting around to get enough supplies, I go exploring to see what exactly this moon has to offer. And there appears to be a lot of inactive structures that need to be unfrozen and then repaired to become usable. We'll see what those are about in a second, but first let's get something at least resembling a base up and running. Solid fuel and red circuits are the items you get by far the most from nuclear scrap, so those two will get their very own belt-based sorters. Everything else comes out in small enough amounts that we can just use filtered inserters to sort the items into their own chests. Get some miners down, plug in the scrap, and we have a working base. And just in case the inserters miss any items, I'll run the end of the belt back to the start with a priority input splitter. Now is where it gets interesting. Designs like these work pretty well on Fulgora, because you can just have robots handle any logistical work. But here we don't have access to robots, so we'll need to get creative. I've grouped items that recycle into similar ingredients together, and I'll use circuits to control when items get inserted directly into recyclers. Throughput in this base is so low for the moment that I'll just put all raw ingredients into chests and figure out the rest later. Most basic materials will come from recycling steam turbines, centrifuges, and heat pipes, so the other items aren't a concern for now. Now we're also gonna need heat to keep this base running, so solid fuel will go onto a belt, and that belt will then go all the way around to every heating tower currently in use. And to make sure it never locks up the base, we'll read the belt contents, and if solid fuel goes above a certain amount, it'll be destroyed in these recyclers. You might have noticed this huge thing in the middle here. This is the ancient Fulgoran reactor, and repairing it is one of our key goals here. The first step in repairing it is to excavate 8,000 concrete from it, which is thankfully pretty easy, so I'll just leave some inserters to get that done while we work on other things. Red circuits are nice to have, but what we really need are green circuits. And another thing we really need are engines. Thankfully, everything you need for engines we already have coming in from recycling. Engines and green circuits are used to craft structure repair kits. Using those, we can repair the broken structures that are strewn about the place. Repairing them gives us a fully functional Fulgoran cryogenic plant. And the first thing to do with it is to research Fulgoran cryogenics by filling it with nuclear scrap. After that's done, we can feed methane ice into the cryo plant to get light oil and a byproduct methane gas, which is completely useless. Now let me show you the weirdest mechanic I've seen on a modded planet so far. Those charging rods from a bit ago can be set to either positive or negative polarity, and they manipulate the trajectory of solar wind particles that are constantly flying through Cerys. Solar wind hitting uranium has a chance to turn that uranium into plutonium, which is needed to run the ancient reactor. So I'll set up a grid of charging rods with a bunch of chests in the middle holding uranium. And here you can see one of them already turning into plutonium. I don't know if there's some kind of optimal way to position the charging rods for maximum plutonium production, but I'm hoping that just setting this up early will be enough to get us a decent amount for later. So after repairing a few more cryo plants, it's time to get to work on the Cerys and science pack. First we'll need to make ammonia, but that needs sulfuric acid. So we'll need to crack down our light oil into petroleum, and then turn that petroleum into sulfur, then turn the sulfur into acid. Combining that with some nitrogen-rich minerals gives us ammonia and a single iron ore, which we then route back to the sulfuric acid to make the process self-sustaining. But before that I need to recycle a bunch of concrete to get the bricks I need to make a furnace, since that's the only way to get stone here. The ammonia then gets turned into nitric acid, and the nitric acid goes into the science pack along with repair kits, uranium and superconductors. But we don't actually have superconductors. And since I didn't want to deal with repairing another cryo plant, I used 50 of our limited starting blue circuits to make an EM plant. And just like that we have our first Cerys science packs. We also have the special Cerys lab. It doesn't do anything interesting, we just needed to do research here. The first thing we can research are flare stacks, which destroy fluids, so we can finally get rid of that annoying methane gas byproduct from earlier. Now the rest of the research we need can't be done with just the Cerys science pack. So we need to make some red science. With some belt spaghetti we can get that done pretty quick. Red science will let us research the next step in repairing the reactor. After that we need some even more unholy belt routing to get some green science going. And start producing some extra blue circuits. They'll be needed a lot going forward, and I've already used up pretty much all the free ones you get from the start. After researching and crafting a very expensive item, we get to place this scaffold over the ancient reactor. And now we see that it wants 400 blue circuits and repair kits. Good thing we automated them already, huh? While I wait for the reactor to be repaired, I figure I might as well set up the fuel production. Plutonium fuel cells are precious, and we'll need to make the most of them. Reprocessing spent fuel with nitric acid gives you mixed oxide waste solution that you can then feed into a centrifuge to get back about half the amount of plutonium you used, and a bit of uranium. We'll also be using productivity modules in every step here. Trust me, if you play this mod, you should do your best to conserve your plutonium. A bit of waiting around and manually helping the base out later, we finish a very important research. Lubricant synthesis. It gets us some lubricant from light oil, carbon and lithium. Okay, but how does that help? I don't see any lithium or carbon around here. Well, there actually is some lithium brine over here in the ice, but as you can see, there's no heating towers nearby to unfreeze it. And we also have these asteroids flying about. Yeah, they aren't just background decorations. Those are actual asteroids like the ones you find in space. And shooting down the carbonic asteroids gives you chunks you can process into carbon. To actually crush the asteroids, we need to repair this Fulgoran crusher. And to unfreeze the lithium, we need to use the newly repaired and operational ancient reactor, which is the only method of generating standard heat on Cerys. Before I turn the reactor on though, I also build a small power plant, since I've been running this base off only solar panels until now and it's starting to be a problem. And one quick combinator to make sure we're as efficient as possible with our fuel cells. Once the reactor is operational, it does start shooting out gamma radiation, which does a bit of damage. But my shield equipment kinda makes it a non-issue. Now we start using the brine to make lithium, spaghetti over some more belts to make extra engines, start making lubricant, and some electric engines. You probably see where I'm going with this. Combine the electric engines with some batteries, green circuits and steel from our base, and we're making robot frames. Yeah, I know I'm very creative, solving the Fulgoran moon in the same way I solved the actual Fulgora. It's not my fault robots make handling scrap recipe chains so much easier. Now that we have robots, it's time to deconstruct this whole base and build something better. Actually using red belts in this post-endgame save? No way. Once again, we need to sort out the items. We'll keep the few chestfuls of solid fuel and the rest will be destroyed. Red circuits also come in at a high enough amount to warrant their own recycler setup. Everything else will be put directly into active provider chests and go into these storage chests. After that, we'll read the logistics network and use it to set the requests in these chests. That'll break down each item once it goes over the amount of it I want to keep. Once we have all of that, everything is just a requester chest away. So let's rebuild the sciences. Red and green are easy enough, but if we want to get off this moon we'll also need yellow science. We can't use molten metals here, so we have the rare appearance of the default LDS recipe. Nuclear scrap gives a lot of copper, steel and plastic, so the cost won't be that much of a problem. And since we already have robot frames in blue circuits, I can just have the bots make yellow science as well. It'll be a trickle, but we don't need much. And this base is still only running off like 60 scrap per second, so we can't be too picky. With yellow science, we can finally queue up the Cerys cargo drops technology. Now, while waiting for that to research, there isn't much to do other than patch up holes in the base and try to increase production as much as we can. For example, we swap all the chests in the plutonium farming area with buffer chests, which request uranium and send anything that isn't uranium to storage. Increase power a bit since robots need lots of electricity. And we can automate the asteroid collection for carbon by using gun turrets. Anything knocked down by these turrets will be automatically picked up by the robots. Also some rocket fuel using the ammonia recipe so we can launch rockets from here. Eventually the research finishes and we can fly back up to our spaceship. Ah, but wait, this place made me use Stone Age technology like yellow belts in tier 2 assemblers. So before leaving, I decided to show the Fulgurans how to build a real factory. Now that's much better. Have you ever wanted to build a factory in the crushing depths of the ocean? Well, if you have, then Maraxsis might be the planet for you. Maraxsis is an ocean world with no solid surface, so hopefully the engineer can hold his breath. Oh yeah, and it has fish. Like actual fish. 10 out of 10. Immediately next to where we land, we find mollusk husks, which unlock glassworking. And sandstone, which unlocks this planet's special building, the hydro plant. We also get a new vehicle, the submarine. Submarines are crucial, both to making sure you don't drown from staying underwater too long, but also for automating your base. After a bit of exploring, we find this thing. This is the trench, the deepest part of the ocean. And you can actually go down there using a submarine. It's extremely dark, except for the glow of molten lava, which we'll be making great use of later. Maraxsis is in the same position as Aquilo, in that it requires technologies from the first 3 planets, and is somewhat reliant on imports. But that also means I get to bring all my cool toys. No yellow belts here. As always, we need to use solar panels at the start. Thankfully they actually work here, unlike on Aquilo. Then we'll need some hydro plants. They take some standard materials and saline water. And since we're literally in the ocean, we can put an offshore pump anywhere to get said saline water. Hydro plants can be used to craft another very important building, the pressure dome. Most production buildings don't work in the ocean, so most of our base will be built inside one of these huge glass globes. Though to actually make them useful, we need to feed them atmosphere. Atmosphere is a new fluid that can be crafted on any planet, except for Maraxsis. So I use remote view to set up a quick atmosphere barrel in operation on Vulcanus, wait a bit for it to arrive, and unbarrel it straight into the pressure dome. Now, like I said before, production buildings, with the exception of the chemical plant and hydro plant, only work inside pressure domes. Accumulators also don't work in water, so I fill half of the first pressure dome with them so my base actually works more than 50% of the time. The first thing we'll need to do on Maraxsis is get access to salt. So we need to filter the saline water and hydro plants to make brackish water. This process takes a salt filter and outputs a spent salt filter 95% of the time. Then we electrolyze the brackish water to get hydrogen, oxygen and salt. The hydrogen and oxygen can be combined in a chemical plant to make regular old water, which can then be used to clean the spent salt filters, making this whole process a nice self-sustaining loop. But we have a tiny problem. The hydro plant has an innate 50% quality bonus. Oh god, please not again. So the whole thing stops working after a few seconds because all the salt filters are a mess of random quality levels. So then I spend the next 30 minutes fiddling with combinators and circuit conditions to make the hydro plants automatically switch to the recipe which corresponds to the quality of the salt filter is currently using. And after for some reason way too much trial and error, I got it to a working state and felt really smart. Only to then realize the salt filtering process can be done in chemical plants which don't have the quality bonus. So all of this was useless. Moral of the story, always check the Factoriopedia for new modded recipes you don't know anything about. And also I am an idiot. So after building a few more pressure domes for later, I rebuild the salt filtering. which as it turns out is a lot easier now that it's not spitting out random quality salt filters. Who would have thought? Just need to set a requester chest to feed in some additional salt filters if too many get destroyed. Spent salt filters get split off to get cleaned, and now we have brackish water. We do still want to use hydro plants for the electrolysis though, since different qualities of salt are actually useful for something. Also, hydro plants can void any fluid in the game, so we'll use them to get rid of any excess water that might deadlock the system. That recipe switching setup wasn't completely useless though. I can use it here to make this one foundry swap between the different qualities of salt when enough is present in these chests here. We wanted the higher quality salt because the higher your salt quality, the more molten salt you get from melting it. And since we're gonna end up with more than we can use, any normal quality salt will instead go towards making glass. In addition to salt, glass needs sand and limestone. Sand is easy, just place a mining drill literally anywhere on Maraxsis and it spits out sand. Limestone is a bit more involved though. First we need to find one of these coral reefs. Mining them gives us coral, which after 10 minutes spoils into limestone. So once mined, I'll put it in chests and only take it out once it's become limestone. Here's also where I'll use my first vehicle dock. Submarines aren't only for personal use, they can also be automated to work like trains, just minus the rails, with the vehicle dock serving as train stations. So I just need to make this submarine stay at the coral reef until it's filled with limestone, and then come over to the base and drop it off straight into our glass production. And now, using our automated glass and molten salt, along with some imported uranium, we can make MSR fuel cells. They're used in this thing, the molten salt reactor, which works as a weird kind of mix between a fission and a fusion reactor. They output superheated steam, which can't go into regular pipes, so has to go straight into these oversized steam turbines. No, that's not my description of them, that's literally what they're called. They do output a very decent amount of power though, so the size is warranted. Now we're no longer reliant on crappy solar power. Now that we have some key processes automated, let's pick up some of these special tungsten pipes and take a trip to the trench. Using this special duct, we can transport fluids to and from the trench. We get lava the same way we usually do, with an offshore pump, but we need to use this intake valve to transfer the fluid from a normal pipe to the special tungsten piping. Back out of the trench, we drag these huge pipes back to the base, and just like that we have all the lava we need for molten metals. Processing limestone in a foundry can give us the calcite we need, along with some stone. And thankfully I can make this decently compact setup. Once we have molten iron, we can get all the essentials and stick them in provider chests for later. Oh yeah, the pressure domes also serve as roboports. Same deal for molten copper, and if you're wondering where I got all these legendary buildings to throw around, you should go watch my mega base video. Yeah, seamless cross promotion right there, I know. Now we have basic supplies automated, but we aren't done with Maraxsis yet. Next we're going back to the trench, and this time we actually need to build here. You can place a pressure dome in the trench, but it still won't work without atmosphere. An unbarreling atmosphere needs electricity, but solar power here is completely ineffective, 0% efficiency. So the first problem to solve is getting atmosphere and electricity to the deepest part of the ocean. Atmosphere can simply be taken all the way from the base and transported in these massive pipes to avoid having to unbarrel it in the trench. And for power, I'll use some heating towers to make steam. Steam is the most logical choice since it's also needed in another process in the trench. Also, I need to make a circuit to get rid of excess quality salt, since I underestimated just how much salt we make. Once I have steam down here, I can use it to run turbines and get a decent amount of power. Steam is also needed for the only way to get sulfur. Sadly, it needs to be made in hydro plants, so the annoying quality problem presents itself again, but this time instead of solving it in some clever way, I'll just destroy anything that isn't normal quality. The main thing we need from the trench is worm specimens, which are a key item in science production. They take 2 ingredients we don't have yet, but we can preemptively set up the submarines that will deliver things in and out of the trench. Now the next item we'll be dealing with is the most ridiculous yet. Fish food. It takes plastic, sand, coral, tropical fish, and the jelly. First, let's handle the fishing part. Yes, there's fishing in this game now, I'm not making it up. To catch fish, we need to use these modified agricultural towers in the coral reefs. You can even see the fish gathering around the towers already. But to automate catching a fish, we need to already have fish food, so we'll come back to this later. Sand is easy, just put a mining drill outside the pressure dome. And since we're already close to the coral reef, getting coral isn't a problem either, just need to make sure to get rid of any that spoils. Now is where this recipe really goes off the rails. To get jelly, I need to put fish and bullets into a biochamber. Yeah, I guess I'm just shooting a fish until it becomes jelly. This process also reveals that this planet is canonically Earth in the future. How do I know that? Because the fish are absolutely full of microplastics. Microplastics can be smelted into full plastic bars to supply our fish food though, so it's not all bad. Since this is all made in biochambers, I'll need some nutrients to run them. Thankfully, we can make those straight from fish, and with that, we should start seeing some fish food get produced. Most of the initial production will go straight to the fishing towers to make sure the process can sustain itself, and the rest will be sent down to the trench along with these worm confinement cells to make worm specimens. Just need to leave some recyclers to get rid of limestone and spoilage, and that's that ridiculous process done. Worm specimens will come out in random qualities because they're made in hydroplants, but that's fine, since science production will also have the same problem, so it'll balance out a bit. Once we deliver the worm specimens back to base, making the science pack is as simple as combining them with some salt and saline water. We already have all different qualities of salt, so I'll just have a machine crafting every different quality of science pack. But just because we have science packs doesn't mean we're quite done yet. We still need to get the science and ourselves off this planet. So first I quickly set up some machines to make LDS and blue circuits, but getting rocket fuel is a bit more interesting. You can turn tropical fish into carbon, and then use the carbon and sulfur from earlier to make coal. Then we liquefy that coal into heavy oil, crack it down into light oil, and finally make our rocket fuel. But before we go any further, we need to do some on-planet research to get Project Sea Dragon, the technology that will let us launch rockets from here. Rockets on Maraxsis require an additional Forphyton, super sealant substance, but it's pretty straightforward to make with everything we already have, so it's not much of an issue. We will use 5 rocket silos, one for each quality of science, to avoid dealing with mixed quality rocket launches. And just like that, we've conquered the oceans of Maraxsis. Now let's get in our underwater rocket and blast off to our next planet. Do you like sulfur? Do you like pipes? Do you like chemical plants? Well, if you do, then I have just the planet for you. Welcome to Corrundum, an inhospitable wasteland blanketed in CO2 gas and thunderstorms, filled with precious resources. What's that? Oh, it has no cargo drop or building restrictions, you say? Well then don't mind if I just slap down a fusion reactor. Okay, there is an intended way to get power here. But it's just boilers and steam engines again, but using petroleum gas instead of water. Corrundum has 4 main resources. Sulfur ore, which just means sulfur that you dig out of the ground. Calcite. This blue stuff called, chalcopyrite. And platinum. Also, the lakes here aren't water, but instead liquid petroleum. And seeing as I don't exactly know what I need yet, let's go around and put mining drills on everything. Then drag all the belts together. It's been a while since I've used the proper main bus. Much like on Vulcanus, the rocks contain a bit of iron, copper and stone. So I'll just throw those into foundries to get some basic materials. I need said basic materials to make Corrundum's special building, the catalytic chemical plant. It's not some huge fancy thing with innate bonuses, but it does give us access to this planet's recipes. Then I realized that platinum ore by itself is useless, so I take it off the bus, smelt it into plates, and put those on the bus instead. The main mechanic we'll be dealing with here is chemistry. Sulfuric chemistry to be precise. First thing we'll need is hydrogen sulfide. It's just sulfur and petroleum gas, so easy enough. But it also outputs almost all the petroleum that went in. So to prevent deadlocks, we need to use a pump on the petroleum coming in by offshore pump, and only enable it if we drop below a certain amount in this tank. Corrundum handles technology unlocks in an interesting way, with sulfuric chemistry being locked behind several tiers, each unlocking when you craft its prerequisite fluid or gas. The next step on the sulfur chain is turning our hydrogen fluoride into water. It's simple, but also comes with this sulfur dioxide gas. Thankfully, we need both it and water to make sulfuric acid. And if you hadn't noticed until now, the catalytic chemical plant has 3 fluid inputs. And that makes the standard pipe designs not work that well. Sulfuric acid is the backbone of all production on this planet, so we'll want a lot of it. Now let's start finally using that chalcopyrite ore. Washing it with sulfuric acid gives mixed sulfate solution, which you need to start producing the basic metals. And having sulfuric acid also gives us access to Corrundum's electrochemical science pack, so might as well knock that out next. All things considered, it's pretty simple to make, just sulfur, platinum and sulfuric acid. We can't really use the science for anything yet, but it's nice to have it ready for when we do need it. Next we need to get some iron and copper. The only way to get them currently is by combining the mixed sulfate solution with an iron plate. That gives us copper ore and iron sulfate solution. The iron sulfate solution then goes into another chemical plant together with water to make iron ore and sulfuric acid dilute. I like how just moving the fluid input over by one tile changes how you need to make pipe designs. It's pretty neat. The whole process here will be a self-sustaining loop, so we need to build everything before turning it on. Need to make sure iron plates are fed back into the start, and everything else can go into provider chests. To kickstart it, just use some of the iron you got from rocks, and now we have both ores coming in. But we aren't done yet. The sulfuric dilute is basically a waste product, so we need to void it using some calcite. Also, water production is lagging behind. So to help with that, I use this new process that combines hydrogen sulfide and sulfur dioxide to make water and some sulfur. We don't really care about the sulfur since we can just mine it out of the ground, so it simply gets recycled. But we also have another problem. The production of iron and copper is the same process, so if we're using more of one than the other, it'll deadlock and kill the entire thing. So to fix that, we'll have some recyclers at the end of the belts, and we'll only allow the ore to get to them if the other belt gets too empty. That way it should stay more or less balanced. I hope you listened to me when I said to bring lots of supplies, because just look at how many chemical plants we have already. Okay, so we have science, we have iron and copper, now we need oil products. And to get those we'll need to do some research, so we're once again making red and green science. Then put those into a lab along with the electrochemical science to get access to some Corrundum specific oil recipes. First up, we'll do some reverse oil cracking by turning petroleum into light oil. And even though we have infinite petroleum, there's no coal on this planet. So we need to use this nightmare of a recipe to make plastic instead. And I guess this is why the chemical plants have free fluid inputs. Then we make some good old-fashioned rocket fuel, blue circuits and LDS. With that, we have everything we need to start launching rockets. So let's get our new science packs in orbit and finally call this planet complete. Well, it's not entirely complete. Once you can launch rockets and do some research back on Novice, you get access to a whole bunch of new recipes on Corrundum. These give you much more efficient ways of making pretty much everything we made so far. But I think that's a bit out of the scope of this video, so let's leave it at that. So, now that I've played through these planets, what are my thoughts on the experience? Well, first off, it's a testament to the quality and creativity of the Factorio modding scene, that not even a year since the launch of an absolutely game-changing expansion, we already have mods that are this polished and unique. I've been stuck in the same save for like 4 months straight now, so I haven't really had much chance to explore all the dozens of player-made planets. So I'm sure there's even more content that's this good just waiting for me to find. The way I decided on which planets to play first and include in this video was extremely complicated and thought out. I clicked on the mod portal, searched planet, and downloaded the 3 most popular ones. And hey, it worked. I guess Factorio players have good taste. Maraxsis adds so many new mechanics and interesting twists on existing ones that it's hard to believe it was one of the first modded planets to be fully released. The environment is unique. It adds a second surface to the planet, which is just so cool. Like, imagine this kind of thing on other planets. Going underground on Novice, maybe finding a new species of biter that digs tunnels. You could have elevators carrying up mass amounts of ore. Or finding some huge network of Fulgoran vaults buried under the oil ocean. Or like a million other ideas, but at this point I'm just describing another whole mod worth of content. Submarines are basically just Spidertrons with the addition of the Spidertron Patrol and Spidertron Enhancement mods, but still managed to feel different enough to be cool. I did feel a bit disappointed that submarines had weapon slots, but the planet had no enemies though. I was semi-expecting to run into some kind of Leviathan creature in the abyss, like in Subnautica. The way Maraxsis uses mechanics from other planets was really nice for a late game planet. We had metallurgy from Vulcanis, farming and spoilage from Gleba, and getting a bunch of random junk you don't want from Fulgora. I don't generally like import-reliant planets, since I think it's not a very interesting problem to solve, but eventually the only thing you need to import is atmosphere. Everything else can be made locally by the time you're ready to leave. And funnily enough, I think putting a baseline 50% quality bonus on a building is a super easy way of adding a whole bunch of complexity to any process that needs to be made in that building. I guess if you really didn't want to deal with it, you could just scrap everything that isn't normal quality, but that's a big enough drawback that it's worth actually solving the problem most of the time. Cerys plays very differently to the other 2 planet mods. Firstly, instead of a massive procedurally generated surface, it's a tiny handcrafted one, where everything you see is important in one way or another. Disabling cargo drops is a really good decision, not just because it prevents you from breaking the planet's progression by just dropping everything from orbit, but also because solving problems with limited tech is more interesting. Like yeah, I could go through this whole plutonium creating process and repairing this ancient reactor, or I could just cargo drop a few fission or fusion reactors and never have to worry about it. Or if you could just have logistics bots from the start instead of having to work your way up to them again. If those were actually options, the planet would be way less interesting. The heating towers add an extra element of space restrictions. There were several times where I had to rotate cryoplants so both my inputs and outputs didn't end up in ice. Overall, it feels a lot more like a scenario or what I would expect a campaign mission in Factorio to feel like. The solar wind and plutonium mechanic with charging rods affecting how the tiny particles move kinda blew my mind when I first saw it. I spent probably way too much time fiddling with charging rod setups and didn't really figure out a super good way of farming plutonium. But I'm sure someone out there has found a way to trap particles going in circles indefinitely. In general, I like it when you need to make science packs again from scratch. But I do admit at some points it started to feel quite grindy getting over 1,000 yellow science packs to research cargo drops. Corrundum is a lot more of a standard Factorio experience compared to the other two. Hence why I didn't find as much to talk about there. There aren't many puzzles to solve, and instead the complexity comes from balancing out all the different chemical processes you need to keep your base running. Run out of sulfur dioxide like 6 steps down from what you're working on right now? Guess the whole base is going offline until you fix it. I like how the tech tree opens up as you complete each sulfuric chemistry process. I could see that being a big benefit to newer players that would otherwise feel overwhelmed by the sheer amount of different recipes you have by the end. What I don't like as much is just how many chemical plants and pipes you need, in combination with how late you start getting decent amounts of iron and copper. If you come here without bringing a good amount of supplies, you might end up with quite the grind before you can comfortably stamp down dozens of chemical plants for each process. Chemistry in general is a very underexplored concept in both vanilla Factorio and Space Age. And while the chemistry here is on the simple side, Corrundum would be a good starting point, both for dipping your toe into mods with more complex chemistry, and to modded planets in general, since it's different enough from the default 4 planets, while being just the right amount of complex to not be overwhelming. In general, all 3 planets in this video are very much worth your time, even when just talking about the experience of playing them and not even including all the cool rewards you get for each, like placeable radiative heating towers and plutonium weaponry from Cerys, a new beacon that accepts quality modules, and the ability to place more than one landing pad on each planet from Maraxsis, or a new lab that specializes in quality science pack and an icebox that prevents spoilage from Corrundum. Well, with that, I think I've said enough about these 3 planets, so I just have about 47 more to go. But that's for potential future videos. For now, all I can say is I hope you enjoyed this video, and see ya!